morning, buenos dias from Buenos Aires. I'm currently in La Boca neighborhood doing a tour of this very touristy part of town, but I think it's a must-see when you're in town. And it's close to the Boca Junior Soccer Club, and I think we're going to go by there too on this tour, and going to get some more info about it. It's about 10 a.m. here, and they're serving breakfast. Just your usual stuff for breakfast. It smells good though. So very colorful, very, very colorful. And there's Messi up there. There you go. But I mean, it's very, very, very touristy. But at the same time, at least it's safe. You know, you still gotta watch out for like pickpocketers and stuff. You still gotta be aware, but at least it's safer than other areas. So anyway, gonna get this thing going. Let's go, vamos.
Bueno, buen día, bienvenidas a todos, muchas gracias por venir. Vamos a comenzar, mi nombre es Matías, claramente soy el guía en español.
And I'm Victoria, I'm going to be doing the tour in English today. So, first of all guys, once again, good morning everybody. I remind you of my name, I'm Victoria. I'm going to be your guide today on this tour that will be taking us through the neighborhood of La Boca. A neighborhood that you probably already noticed if you came from other parts of the city of Buenos Aires is a little bit different. We're going to speak a little bit about the uniqueness of this place. We're going to speak a little bit about the connection of the neighborhood with art. We're going to speak a little bit about football. We're going to speak about the old industrial past that we associate with this area of Buenos Aires. And my main objective is that we make it to the end of the tour knowing that La Boca is a little bit more than a tourist trap, as many people make it out to be. So we're going to try to understand, as we said, what is so special about this place. A couple of important things that I remind you before we start with the tour, guys, are first of all that the tour that we're about to do is a tour that normally takes about 2 hours to complete. So around 1, we normally finish about a block away from here. We're going to be doing a little bit of a circle around the neighborhood. And then the other important thing is that the tour that we're about to do is a tour that is conducted by a company called Buenos Aires Free Walks, but this specific tour is not one of the free walking tours that the company offers. This tour has a price of 13,000 pesos per person, but if you haven't paid yet, I normally like collecting at the end of the tour because I like giving people the opportunity to run away if they absolutely hate this, so you have the possibility, guys, if you need to take it. When we think about Buenos Aires, when we think about the origins of the city, we normally tend to go to the year 1580, which is typically the year that we associate with the foundation of the city of Buenos Aires. Across the river, you're already in a different district, and in fact that industrial port over there is actually part of the province of Buenos Aires, which is normally known as Dock Sud. So, properly speaking, the port of the city, as we said, is no longer over here in this area. We do have an element that is also quite interesting, which is this grey structure that is over there on that side. That is one of the more important visual icons that we associate with La Boca. It is a ferry or transporter bridge. It is a kind of bridge that is not so common to find around the world. There's only a handful of them that continue to exist in the world at this point. And you probably notice already that it's not a traditional bridge, it's not a platform that connects two sides. It is basically this inverted U structure that on the top part has this kind of rail-like mechanism, and from there you have these big wires that hang, and on the bottom there is a platform. And through the movement that happens over there on the top, that platform is dragged from one side to the other, allowing for the easy movement of cargo, people, anything that you need to get from one shore to the other. Because we have already mentioned the name of this little river, El Riachuelo, you probably can imagine just by looking at it, the Riachuelo is one of the more polluted bodies of water that we have over here in Argentina. It is really, really filthy, but I do have to tell you guys, this is looking considerably better than what this was, let's say, 20 years ago. Because keep in mind that for many, many years you had factories, tanneries, all these different industries on the shores of the Riachuelo, throwing affluents into the water with complete disregard for the environment. Things started looking really, really terrible, and then still today you continue to have a lot of people living on the margins of the Riachuelo, especially if you go towards the south. So there's always a lot of garbage floating in the water. It looks really, really bad. But as we said, about 20 years ago, you came over here and you couldn't even stand this close to the water because of the smell that was coming out from all of this. This was no longer considered water, literally speaking, in the sense that, you know how water is H2O and the O stands for oxygen? Well, there was no more oxygen over here. It was just a big black blob of something floating over here. It looked disgusting. It smelled really, really terrible. And there were many promises, naturally, to try to clean up the Riachuelo from the city of Buenos Aires, from the province, which we mentioned is a district that is on the other side of the river. So there were a lot of promises, most of them fell through, but eventually they got their act together and they decided to start organizing, and they created this institution known as Acumar that basically deals with the cleaning of the riachuelo. Things that we have over here on the waterfront are quite interesting to start thinking a little bit about one of these, as we mentioned, major renaissances that we had in the history of the neighborhood of LaBoca. You probably noticed already, one of the main things of LaBoca is the color that we see over here in the neighborhood, its connection with art, and where did all of this come from? Well, we mentioned that LaBoca was basically an industrial neighborhood that by the 1930s is already going to start suffering quite a bit because most of the things were closing down over here. So it is roughly around that time, late 1920s, early 1930s, that we're going to see a group of artists that lived and worked over here in LaBoca that are going to start thinking about turning LaBoca into a kind of place for the bohemia of the city of Buenos Aires, a point of attraction for other artists so that people could come, they could establish their studios over here, and these people that were normally known as La Escuela de LaBoca are also going to start producing a lot of art connected with the neighborhood. Among all those people though, we have one person that is going to be very, very special, whose name was Benito Quinquela Martin. You can see his name written over there, Benito Quinquela Martin. He truly is one of the ultimate heroes of the neighborhood of LaBoca. Like, the reason why LaBoca is the way that it is mostly due to Quinquela Martin. Because what did this guy do? Well, Quinquela Martin had lived the harsh reality of the neighborhood of LaBoca. He had been born over here in the year 1890, abandoned at a very young age, raised in an orphanage till about the age of 7, and then at that point he was adopted by a couple of Italians that put him to work in a coal factory, so very, very hard life. But he started developing a certain artistic sensibility at one point. His mother noticed it and she tried to encourage him. He's going to benefit a lot from a lot of the local institutions that we had over here in LaBoca that were being created by the immigrants with the idea of bettering themselves, learning new tasks and things like that. And eventually Quinquela is going to start producing a lot of art connected, as we said, also with the neighborhood, that is going to start attracting the attention of a very wealthy man that became Quinquela's patron. And this man paid for Quinquela to go to different parts of the world, to further his education, and to sell his work in Europe, in the United States, in different parts of the world. You will notice Quinquela doesn't have a paintbrush, even if he was an oil painter, because Quinquela painted with blue paint, typically used in a... Because we're now in the epicenter of the neighborhood of LaBoca, one of the most famous places that we have, not just in the neighborhood, but in the city of Buenos Aires. I always tell people that if you go on Google and you start searching images of Buenos Aires, you're going to see that one of the first things that pops up is an image of Caminito, where we are right now, this little walkway, especially the houses that we have over here on this side. Why is this place so famous? What happens over here? Well, you're going to see, guys, that Caminito, as this little street is called, which is the literal translation of Caminito would be little walkway. And it is a little walkway indeed, because it is 150 meters from that green wall that we have over there to the green wall that we have on that side. And why is this place so important? Well, because Caminito is a kind of open-air museum, as you're going to see. We have a lot of artworks, we have a number of different things over here.
¿Qué tal?
Gracias, sí, perdón, estoy trabajando ahora ya les cuento.
La mejor,
Sí.
the best barbecue here.
Perfecto.
In front.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
¿Puedo darle?
No, ahora no, porque estoy trabajando.
Show tango for free inside.
Bueno.
The best barbecue. You know?
Bueno, muchas gracias.
How are you? My name is Fabricio. Where are you from? Where are you from, man?
Bueno, perdón, nos vamos a correr un poco, let's go this way. Perdón que te interrumpa, pero vos estás interrumpiendo mi trabajo. Así que Caminito is basically, as we said, a kind of open-air museum that was created, that came out of the mind of Quinquela Martin. And how did this become a museum? Well, you're going to see that this is not a traditional street. You're going to see that there's no addresses on Caminito, there's no doors that open towards where we are right now. Basically because this used to be a place for which a little stream ran many years ago, and then at one point there was a train track. There was some train that passed over here, connected with the port activities and everything that we had on that side. By the 1950s, this train was no longer being used. The city decided to take the trucks out. The place became a dump. People were just coming and throwing garbage over here. It was really bad. And then what happened is that Quinquela, seeing what the place had become, decided to try to intervene, and he asked the city authorities if he could turn this, as we said, into a kind of open-air museum. Of course, something that is also extra special about Caminito is the color. And why is Caminito so colorful? What is so special about this place? Well, keep in mind that Quinquela had a very special relationship with color. He had this saying that makes a little bit more sense in Spanish, because it actually rhymes, which is al dolor, color, to pain, color. When he saw a neighborhood that, as we said, was changing, was becoming impoverished, he decided to try to bring literal color into people's lives. And what did he do? He started first doing this kind of thing where he would go to people's houses, he would take a picture of the facade of the house. The picture that he had would typically be in black and white. He would paint over it, and later he would go back to the person and say, hey, can I paint your house like this? And many people would say yes. So you're going to see that he's going to start bringing, as we said, literal color into the neighborhood. There's a big urban legend, I was never able to really verify this or not, but many people will tell you that LaBoca, already in the late 19th century, apparently was quite colorful, in the sense that many of the buildings that we have over here, you're going to see, especially when you look at the quality of construction, was done quite precariously. We mentioned that most of the people that lived over here were immigrants that were coming alone without any money, that they were coming in great numbers to a place where there was nothing here in the city of Buenos Aires. So they had to start building fast, and they had to start building cheap. And many of the materials that they would employ would be tin plates, wood, things like that, things that could easily be accessed over here in the neighborhood of LaBoca. And many people will tell you, part of the urban legend is that when you wanted to paint buildings like this, because there was no money for paint, they would go to the dockyards and they would see who was painting ships over there. And perhaps somebody was painting a ship yellow, somebody was painting a ship red, and perhaps you could get a little bit of each, but that was not enough to cover the whole wall, so you had to develop this kind of patchwork design of that we have, as we said, very associated with LaBoca. In any case, whether that is the origin or not, it is true that the color configuration that we have over here today is something that came out of the mind of Quinquela Martin. Are there any questions about what you've seen over here in Caminito? Anything that comes to mind? So far so good. Then let's go this way. We're going to go, as we said, around the block over there. We're going to see that the tenement houses usually used to be the places that house many of the immigrants that were coming over here to Argentina. We mentioned that Argentina is a country that will receive a lot of immigration in this time period. It is estimated that Argentina is the second country in the world after the United States that received the greatest amount of immigrants at this point. And it's often said that the relative impact that immigration had in this country was far greater than anywhere else because of how small the local population was. There's parts of the city of Buenos Aires, for example, the neighborhood of LaBoca, that are going to be basically populated by immigrants. We have information from the late 19th century that indicates that over 80% of the people that lived over here in LaBoca were immigrants, and most of them were specifically from one country, which is Italy, because the Italians were, as we said, a very, very important immigrant community in this country. And there's one thing that I always like bringing up at this point, which is associated with a musical form that we tend to think about when we think about Argentina, specifically the city of Buenos Aires, which is this music that we normally know as tango. Over here in LaBoca, tango has been kind of touristically exploited. I remind you guys, tango is not something that was necessarily born over here in the neighborhood of LaBoca. It is associated, though, with the influence of the immigrants that were coming over here to Argentina. Let me tell you why. Because you can imagine that the majority of the immigrants that were coming over here were young men of working age that were coming all alone. So the amount of brothels that you had in the city of Buenos Aires was outwardly. And it is often said that it was within the context of the brothel, understanding the brothel more of just a place where you would go to have sex with somebody, but more of as a place of socializing, meeting other people, just hanging out over there. Music would be played in places like that. Typical styles like the Spanish zarzuela, the habanera, things like that, basically was what was played. But then at some point, you run out of repertoire and you had to start improvising. And it is through the influence of certain instruments also that are going to start being brought over here. The violin, the bandoneon, which is typical in tango, that was actually a German instrument that was used in religious music, but it started being adapted to all of this. This new kind of musical styles are going to start developing. And the tango dance also has a pretty kind of, I would say, not very family-friendly version, because it is often said that since that kind of dancing would typically happen in the context of a brothel, it was mostly seen as a dance that happened between a man and a sex worker in places like that. A bit about where we are right now, this little corner, the square that is known as Plaza de los Bomberos Voluntarios de LaBoca, the square of the volunteer firefighters of LaBoca. You're going to see that there's an image over here on the side of this mural where we have an image of firefighters rescuing a woman quite heroically. Here in the neighborhood of LaBoca, firefighters are also considered to be heroes. Together with Quinquela Martin, I would say that the firefighters are also really, really important over here in the neighborhood. You probably noticed on Caminito there is a statue of a fireman rescuing a child too. So why are firemen so important over here in this neighborhood specifically? Still today, LaBoca is at a greater fire risk than other parts of the city of Buenos Aires, but in the late 19th century, to all of this, we also need to add the factor that LaBoca was a kind of remote location compared with the rest of the city. For some years over there, LaBoca was not formally part of the city of Buenos Aires, so there were no firemen stationed in this area. They had to be called over from the city center, and that took a really long time, and sometimes they could not even manage to do it. Why? Because LaBoca, aside from everything that we mentioned had against it, is also a neighborhood that flooded a lot because of how low it is and the proximity that we have to the Riachuelo. If the wind hits Buenos Aires from the southeast, the water starts rising, and La Boca flooded completely. And you will notice that still today, many of the sidewalks are raised over here in La Boca, and the doors are a little bit up because to avoid the water coming into the house. So you're going to see that it was a very, very difficult neighborhood to transit, to call the firefighters over. And at one point, the people of La Boca basically were so fed up with the situation that they decided to start organizing themselves. On June the 2nd of the year 1884, the first group of volunteer firefighters of the neighborhood of La Boca was created. It was the first group of volunteer firefighters in all of Argentina, so that is why June the 2nd is the day of the volunteer firefighter over here in this country. About Boca, I will be telling you specifically about the stadium and all of that. But I normally like prefacing this by telling you that football is important in this country, in case you haven't noticed. Football is a very, very big deal over here in Argentina on many different levels. That is something I also like thinking about. Because on a kind of international level, when you're somebody from Argentina and you travel around the world and you tell people, yeah, I'm from Argentina, people will often respond by saying, Messi, Maradona. Those are typically the names that come up. And it's something that we're proud of being recognized for in general. You're going to see that Argentina is a country that has so many problems, politically, economically, and things like that. So to have like one good thing that we're known for around the world is something that is quite reassuring, quite nice. But naturally, on a more local level, football is something that also is lived with a lot of passion, as you're going to see. It happens in other parts of South America too, and things like that. So it's not just something very specific to Argentina, but you're going to see it here in Argentina. People really depend for their mental sanity on football in some senses, because people put a lot on the teams that they follow. They depend on them for their joy, for their sorrows, for things like that, because we mentioned that living in a country like Argentina is complicated. So to have something that you can attach everything that you're feeling to, that gives you a little bit of stability, is something that a lot of people feel very powerfully over here in the country. Among those clubs, of course, we have one that is very historic, very important still today in Argentina, which is Boca Juniors. This club was founded in the year 1905 over here in the neighborhood of La Boca by a group of 5 teenagers, 5 adolescents, that decided to give the name to the club of Club Atlético Athletic Club Boca Juniors. Surprised to know that there was another club that was founded over here just a couple of years before, in the year 1901, and we're speaking about the rival of Boca Juniors, Riverplate. Now, today we walk around La Boca and we don't see anything related with Riverplate. So what happened with River? Well, there's an urban legend that goes around La Boca where they will tell you that at some point in the 1920s, the neighborhood had become so small for this rivalry that they decided that they were going to have to sort it out some way, and they said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to have a match. Whoever wins that match gets to stay in the neighborhood of La Boca. Who do you think won according to that story? Boca Juniors, of course. What happened with River? We do know that coincidentally, around the same time, there was a president that was very interested in spending a lot of money in the club, in bettering it, and things like that. And it is roughly around this time period too that they decided to take the club out of the neighborhood of La Boca. The club was relocated to the area of Palermo Recoleta, right there in the middle, and then eventually a little bit further to the north, to the area of Belgrano Núñez, which is where today you can find the stadium of Riverplate, El Monumental. Notice right away why I like bringing people to this side of the stadium too, and not just finish with that image of what we have over there, because from where we were standing, even with all its quirks and particularities, La Bombonera looks like a normal stadium, but when we come to the side you can tell that it's a very odd shaped stadium because it is a D, it's not an O. It has this completely flat side over here where we are right now. It looks kind of unfinished. People wonder like what's going on over here. There's a reason for the stadium to look this way, related with something that we already mentioned, which is that the club initially didn't have a lot of money to acquire all the land over here and all of that. They just had this plot of land. This is what they had to work with. Victor Sulkic and Luis Delpini, the architect and engineer that designed all of this, they ended up saying, okay, we're going to design you something that if in the future you have the money and you have the possibility to buy all of this land over here, you will be able to expand the stadium in this direction. It's 2024 and we're still having this debate, guys, believe it or not. It is true that as of today, Boca Juniors has roughly 300,000 official members of the club. And that literally means that even if you're like a card-carrying member of the club and you pay your dues and you do everything, you're still not guaranteed a seat within La Bombonera when Boca plays, because the seating capacity of La Bombonera, with all the changes that they did over the course of the years, is of 57,000 people. So that leaves out a lot of people. We're going to do a quick final stop over here because it's getting warm over here, so let's just put an end to this. But I remind you guys that we're now making it to the end of the tour. We're next to this little corner, this little football court, basketball court that we have over here that has the phrase República de LaBoca, the Republic of LaBoca over there on the back. The idea of the Republic of LaBoca as a place that is separate from the Republic of Argentina even, is a very, very powerful one. I was telling you guys that because of all the characteristics that LaBoca had historically, being this kind of isolated place, retired from the rest of the city of Buenos Aires, with mostly an immigrant community, mostly of Italians, mostly of Genoese, that all these different things basically play in a way where LaBoca has become a neighborhood that has a very unique sense of identity that we don't find in any other neighborhood over here in the city of Buenos Aires. It is a very unique thing, and LaBoca is also a neighborhood that does some very interesting things in the level of organizing locally. We were just speaking a little bit before about how LaBoca is a neighborhood that exists in this kind of duality we mentioned between being this very kind of touristic part of the city of Buenos Aires while still being a working class neighborhood that changes dramatically depending on where you go over here. How does this happen? Well, because LaBoca has been doing a lot of very special work trying to avoid gentrification over here in the neighborhood. There's a lot of associations of neighbors, people that go to the legislature, people that speak with different lawyers, and whenever something new is built over here in LaBoca, whenever there's a new project or an urban developer comes and things like that, they do a lot of different studies and they truly try to negotiate with the people that are making the things to see how these institutions, how these places are going to have an impact on the lives of the people that live, that work over here, that live over here. So you're going to see that it's a very, very special neighborhood in that sense. And the idea, the uniqueness of the Republic of LaBoca actually comes from an urban legend that is also told of the late 19th century, which is at a point in which we mentioned LaBoca was so different from the rest of Buenos Aires that the Italians that lived over here decided to declare the independence of LaBoca, and they will tell you that they even went as far as writing to the king in Italy. We don't know if this happened or not, but it continues to be a very central idea of the feelings that people have over here in the neighborhood, and you're going to continue to see it represented on murals, on souvenirs, on things like that. So, guys, as I said, I hope at this point I was able to give you a little bit of an idea about why LaBoca is so special and why it's so unique and so different from the rest of Buenos Aires. And then if you want to rate and review us, I remind you that you can go on TripAdvisor, you can look for Buenos Aires Free Walks, give us 5 stars, say beautiful things about the tour, about Victoria especially, remember to include my name over there, and then you can just leave a nice review over there. And then the final thing, guys, that I have to remind you of is that, as we said in the beginning, the tour that we just did is a tour that has a price of 13,000 pesos per person. I hope you had a very nice time today. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, that you were able to see some beautiful things over here in the neighborhood of LaBoca. I remind you that if you want to do any of the other tours that the company offers, we're called Buenos Aires Free Walks. You can find us on our website, buenosairesfreewalks.com, and you have all the information for everything that we do there.
That was actually a really good tour. I totally recommend Free Walks Buenos Aires for LaBoca. Really cool information. And yeah, it's about lunchtime. It's also about cerveza time. So you know the deal. This market's absolutely insane.